Will the Darren Rizzi era for the New Orleans Saints start off with a little 2-game win streak? We'll talk about that right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome back inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm your host, Chris Rosvoglu, and as always, the Straight Up Saints podcast is brought to you by Scott Fickner Injury Lawyers. If you've been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, or hurt offshore, Scott Fickner handles it all. You give him a call at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. Week 11 for the Saints is here. Technically, week 2 of the Darren Rizzi era for the Saints, and it started off with a 20-17 thrilling win over the Falcons, where a lot went right, a lot went wrong. At the end of the day, they still were able to get the W. And for New Orleans, there's been such, conversation about what are they as a team? Are they a team that is probably tanking? Are they a team that is trying to go for it at this stage in the season, despite having a 3-7 record? And that has created a ton of debate on social media. I know there's so many Saints fans who, I've had interactions with, and I enjoy having those interactions with, where they're all about tanking and getting the best possible player and putting themselves in a position to be picking, top 5 or top 8, whatever it may be. And there's the other side of it where, like, hey, you still got 7 games left until you're mathematically eliminated. They want you to go for it. And, if the Saints were to win this weekend and let's say the Falcons start slipping up, maybe things change. So I can see either side to the equation here. There's no doubt about it. But let me just start to get into how I feel about it and give my take. And as always, guys, I want to encourage you, if you are watching our live stream, to make sure to like the video. It really helps out the channel, and share your thoughts, because we'll get to any of your comments towards the end of the show. We'll get through every single one. So whatever you guys have to put, comments, suggestions, predictions, anything on your mind regarding the Saints, put in the chat and we'll get to it. Let's start off, though, with this upcoming game, and why I do believe this is a really, really good, I'd say opportunity here for Darren Rizzi to go on a win streak. You got the win over the Falcons. This weekend, you got the Browns. After that is your bye, so you get some time to reset, get guys a little bit more healthy, and then kind of attack coming out of the bye with the Rams game and Giants games, where Rams game will be the toughest of the 3-game stretch, but the Giants, that seems to be a pretty, winnable game with the way they've played. And, with talking about this 3-game stretch for the Saints, it does, kind of bring up something that I brought up on Twitter, which also brings to us our tweet of the week, which is presented by Standard Mortgage. To get in touch with a local lender for life, you can call at 504-569-3902. Once again, 504-569-3902 for a home loan expert from Standard Mortgage. I tweeted earlier today at 3-7, it's totally reasonable to start thinking about the NFL draft. That said, the next 3 games are not a gauntlet for the Saints. As I mentioned before, Browns, Rams, Giants. I think that this slate for New Orleans is so fascinating, because while we're all ready to start talking about the Travis Hunters of the world, there's a real possibility where in about a month from now, you look at the Saints record and they got, they're 5-8, or who knows, 6-7. And I'm not saying necessarily that's what's going to happen. All I'm telling you right now is, with the energy that the Saints brought last week, if they're able to duplicate that kind of performance against opponents that aren't necessarily great — Browns, we know, are having a miserable season, and I'll talk about them in just a moment. Giants having a miserable season. And then the Rams, who, yes, are the best team of that bunch. And the one thing about them is they're going to bring a great quarterback coach combo to the floor there with Stafford and McVay. They just lost to the Miami Dolphins. So you look at this 3-game stretch for the Saints, and it's so easy to say, you know what, I want them to tank. What I would tell you is, this is an excellent opportunity to see, do the Saints have their coach here? And if they are able to rattle off, these 3 wins, and get it to 4-game win streak, and all of a sudden you're at 6-7, yeah, you're frustrated about the pick. I'd understand that. But you might stop for a second and say, hey, do you have something in Darren Rizzi? So I think we're going to get a lot of questions answered, and that's the good thing about this 3-game stretch. You lose 2 out of the 3 here, start thinking about the draft. Definitely start thinking about the draft. You might be thinking about it already. You win 2 out of 3, or you win 3 out of 3 here. You know what? Maybe your December football is going to be a little bit more interesting than you thought it was a month ago. And for people who are big on tanking, and I totally understand why you'd want the Saints to get a premium player in the upcoming draft, this is what I would tell you, and this is the way I'm looking at it more than anything. While I'd love to see the Saints, draft one of these premier players that you feel like is going to be a building block, the problem for the Saints isn't going to be where they're picking, in my opinion. It's who's going to be making the pick. That's the question that I want answered, because yeah, I'd love the idea of the Saints picking top 7, but do you also trust the regime that's been burning draft picks like crazy to pick in the top 7 and make the right decision? That is the question. Whereas if you get a different decision maker in, what if you are picking 10? Yeah, it's not as, sexy as picking 6, right? But man, if you trust the decision maker at 10 better than you do the one at 6, then I think that changes the equation a little bit. So I'm looking at these next 3 games. I think it's an excellent opportunity for Darren Rizzi here to try and go on a win streak. Browns and Giants are the winnable games. And then Rams, it's really anyone's game. And I think for New Orleans, obviously you're not thinking playoffs, right? You're 3-7. So there's got to be a sense of realism. But there also is an understanding that next year's cap's going to be brutal. Next year's roster is going to be still going through this rebuild. Whether it's a soft rebuild or a hard rebuild, it's going to be a rebuild. It's just a matter of which one comes first, if they're going all out or if they're doing it progressively. So you got to find out, can this guy maybe be that coach? Because New Orleans keeps talking about wanting to develop a coach. The idea of developing Dennis Allen never made any sense. The guy's never won anything, and coming from the Raiders, he was terrible, Rizzi, on the other hand, granted, we still need to see more. We've seen 1 game of him. That is a guy who has not been a head coach in the NFL, has a ton of experience, a lot of coaching experience at the collegiate level, and he's able to lean on really smart minds, whether that's Dan Campbell, whether that's Todd Bowles, whether that's Sean Payton, whether that's Bill Parcells. So we're gonna get a lot of questions answered in the next 3 games. The most important ones being, do they have a potential coach in the building that they can maybe think about hiring after this year? And then the second one, which is more important for us fans, and I get that, where the hell are they going to be picking? I think it's so early right now to start talking about their draft pick. In 3 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now, when we know what that record's looking like, and this 3-game stretch that seems very favorable for them is over, we'll know. That's when you fire up Tankathon and you start looking at what's going on. So that's how I feel right now about where the Saints are at. So for this weekend, if they're going to win, obviously, they got to start running the football well like they did at the start of the Falcons game. Defense also has to come to play. And interestingly enough, the defense is going to go up against a familiar face in Jameis Winston. Jameis makes his return to New Orleans this Sunday. I would say I don't want to say the headlines around it because it was never going to get that type of appeal from a national scope. But I would say the appeal of this return is a little different now. I think had Dennis Allen still be in the building, knowing what went down between him and DA, knowing how Jameis and DA didn't see eye to eye at the end of that Falcons game last year, I think it's a little bit more interesting. It definitely loses a layer of excitement. But Jameis's return is fascinating because I think Jameis, and for better or worse, and maybe Saints fans might think this is disrespectful, but I just think this is who he is. He is the same unpredictable quarterback that he's always been. His first start with the Browns this year, he lit it up, 330-plus yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and they beat the Baltimore Ravens. The Baltimore Ravens are obviously a Super Bowl contender. They've been, for the most part of this season, a juggernaut on offense. They go out there and they beat them in a shootout. Real impressive performance from Jameis. And then the next week, he faces a Chargers team that the Saints have faced, and he has 230 yards, 1 touchdown, 3 picks. It's frustrating to say sometimes it's typical Jameis, but it is who he is. He is a sporadic quarterback who can give you his best football one day and his worst football the next. And the main question is going to be, which version of him shows up on Sunday? And I think for the Saints, there's going to be some matchups here that I think they need to take advantage of if they're going to make sure bad Jameis Winston shows up. And I think the first thing is going to be, and the most obvious, are you rushing the passer? New Orleans' defensive line isn't great. We understand that. I think they made progress last week. I thought Chase Young played well. I thought Peyton Turner played well. Cam Jordan got his first sack of the season. So they did different things well, and I think Darren Rizzi's shuffling up the staff and putting Brian Young with the D-line and making him focus there. Maybe that gave them some added juice. Well, this is going to be the test for them, right? Because the Saints right now have the 27th lowest quarterback pressure rate in the NFL, 30.3%. That's not good. When you're ranked 27th in that category, that's a problem. Good news for them, they're going up against the worst offensive line in terms of sacks given up this year. So something's got to give. It's honestly a movable force versus a stoppable, a stoppable object versus a movable force. That's kind of what we reached with these two kind of horrible units. Saints defensive line when it comes to rushing the passer, Browns offensive line when it comes to protecting the passer. So for New Orleans, if you're going to get the worst version of Jameis and you're going to get those multiple takeaways and really flip the game on its head, and I think that's what they're going to need to do in order to win this game, you got to get some takeaways like they did last week. I think it starts with that defensive line. I don't care if it's Chase Young, Carl Granderson, Brian Brzee, Peyton Turner, maybe Cam Jordan again. Someone's got to make that play and shift the tides for the Saints. And I think that's going to be a main thing. The defense is going to have their chance anyway in the back end. I think they swarm back there, whether it's Alante. Hopefully Kool-Aid McKinstry comes back in the fold, and the injury report's looking promising for him, which is what you want to see. You want to see these young guys get in on the action, especially when this season kind of feels like it's a lost one. You want to see what you got from those guys. Whether it's Kool-Aid, Alante Taylor, Tyrann Mathieu had a really clutch interception last week. You feel like the DBs are going to be swarming. Will Harris would be another. He gave them a really big boost last week. I think there's going to be a tremendous opportunity here for the New Orleans Saints to do something. Defensive line has to, though, apply some pressure on Jameis and make him pull the trigger when he shouldn't. And if that happens, you're going to be in great shape. You know, no team knows this Jameis Winston better than the Saints, I'd say right now. At least this version of the Saints. They know him pretty damn well. The players know him. You know these defensive players went up against him in practice. And you know the coaching staff knows how to go up against Jameis. So you got to win that matchup. Sometimes it'll be that simple when it comes to football. And I think this is one of those where you need to make sure that Jameis stat line, it's much more similar to the Chargers game than the Ravens game. Because if the Ravens version of Jameis shows up where we saw 2-3 weeks ago, you might be in for a rude awakening. If the Chargers one comes up, all of a sudden we're talking about a 2-game win streak for a team that looked absolutely lifeless 2 weeks ago. So we'll see what happens for New Orleans, but there's no question about it. You got to get pressure on Jameis Winston. You got to force him into mistakes that we know he is capable of making. Obviously, for the Saints, not just come down to that, though. Your quarterback has to play well, and I'll talk about Derek Carr in just a couple of seconds. Before I do that, though, I want to get a quick word from one of our sponsors, Scott McNair.
And Jonathan Williams brings it all the way back from the 20-yard line.
What a terrific way to end the first half.
And tonight's game is brought to you by Scott McNair Injury Attorneys. They always fight for the win.
You mean attorney? It's one lawyer. Scott McNair?
No, there's two.
Brad Scott and David McNair.
Well, it's confusing.
That it is. They could have picked a better name.
Scott McNair, Injury Attorneys, we fight for the win.
Once again, thank you to Scott McNair for being part of the program. We greatly appreciate it. So we talked about Jameis Winston, right? We talked about what's going to be at stake here. I mean, this is one of those quote-unquote revenge games, and it's going to be fascinating to see. Derek Carr, I think, though, that's going to be another player you're going to keep an eye on, and that's always the case for every Saints game, right? Because you don't know what version of Derek Carr is going to show up. First 2 weeks of the season, Derek Carr was great. And then not so much, really pretty much the rest of the season until last week against the Falcons, where had Alvin caught that touchdown pass, this man would have thrown for 325 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks. Now, 2 touchdowns, no picks, and 269 passing yards is still pretty damn good. And Carr had an efficient day at the office, and more importantly, didn't have any turnover-worthy plays or mistakes that were backbreaking. So Carr played well. I think this is going to be a matchup for him that really suits him well. When you think of Cleveland, you think of a really good defense. I think last year's defense, there were moments for them. This year is not the case. Quarterbacks are having field days against the Browns this season. Justin Herbert, 282 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, no picks. Lamar Jackson, 289 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, no picks. Now, you're going to say, Chris, you just mentioned 2 of the better quarterbacks in the league. I did. Now, let's get to some others. Jalen Hurts, another good quarterback, not maybe as good, obviously, as a guy like Lamar Jackson. 264 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, no picks. There's a trend here. Daniel Jones. Let's go down a notch. Let's go all the way to Daniel Jones, who's about to be benched in New York against Cleveland. 236 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. More importantly, Daniel Jones, a turnover machine, no picks. So this Browns defense has struggled against quarterbacks of every category. The elite of the elite in Lamar, the really good quarterbacks in Herbert and Jalen Hurts, and even the quarterbacks who are on the verge of getting benched in Daniel Jones have had success. And even the guys I mentioned in Herbert and Lamar, what made their performances really impressive, besides the fact that they're good quarterbacks, it's not like they had 100-yard rushers in that game. Derrick Henry had 73 rushing yards in that Cleveland game. 73 rushing yards for Derrick Henry is a terrible game because his standards are that high. So, another factor that I love for this, the Cleveland Browns defense is 30th in yards per play allowed against play action. Derek Carr, top 3 in play action. Let's be honest, that's when he's at his best. When the Saints are running the football well and Derek Carr is able to do drop back play action and just really feel great under center, I think that's where you get the best version of Derek Carr. And we saw it last week. If we see it again this week, that is a recipe for success. That is a recipe for the Saints getting a win. Now, it could easily turn on its head, right? If that Saints offensive line doesn't do their part and Derek Carr is under pressure, we know how things can turn for Derek Carr. It really is. It's almost like if you're getting protection, you're running the football, he's going to be solid. If you're not getting protection for Derek Carr and you're asking him to do everything, you know it's going to be a rough day for you. So at least you have that part kind of down. But I think this is a really good matchup for Derek. As I mentioned before, this is not the Browns defense of old. It's just not. It's not that type of unit. Another reason for it not being that unit, and this is definitely a factor, when you have an offense that isn't good enough and you're on the field a good amount and you feel like there is a lot of pressure, it starts to weigh on you. And I think for Cleveland, that's been the case. I mean, they're an offense that is bottom 5 in passing yards and rush yards this year. So when you're bottom 5 in those two categories offensively and everything falls on that defense, it's a matter of time until it caves in. So for New Orleans, Derek Carr getting him going and making him feel comfortable is going to be huge. And a big part of that for the Saints is going to be running the football. And a big part of running the football is having your offensive line healthy. And a big part of the Saints being good on the offensive line is having Eric McCoy in the building. And Eric McCoy, at least for now, is on track to play Sunday. Limited practice the last 2 days. Darren Rizzi said he's trending in the right direction. Now, you probably don't have Lucas Patrick. That part hurts. No question about it. But if you had to sub out Lucas Patrick and put in Eric McCoy, I think the Saints can live with that. So with McCoy back in the lineup, that'd be a huge plus for the Saints. You know what Alvin's capable of. Taysom Hill being healthy is great for them. I think what they're really missing is, and I say it all the time, and I feel like I'm, beating a dead horse at this point, they're really missing that Kendre Miller type of running back who gives them that other change of pace, that really one cut hard runner. They're missing that. But I think with Alvin, with Taysom, you can get the job done, especially having Eric McCoy back in the fold. And if you're able to run the football efficiently and you get into that play action game, we know that's where Derek thrives. You might see another deep pass to MVS. You might see that. So I think for New Orleans, it's going to be such a huge key as always. And truthfully, even though this has really become a pick'em game, I genuinely think there are certain things the Saints are buying into right now. It could all go away, right? If the Saints lose on Sunday, start getting ready for the tank. Just start getting ready for it. Because at 3-8, you're like, all right, you're going into the bye. Season feels pretty much over. But I think that this team, matchup-wise, kind of goes well against Cleveland. I really like where they stand here. I like that they're going up against a Cleveland offensive line that's not great, so that should help a really poor pass rush for New Orleans to maybe get their feet under them and start to make plays, especially after last week where they got pressure on Kirk Cousins in that fourth quarter. And offensively, I think they'll be able to do some damage. I think this might be one of those games where good Derek Carr shows up. Doesn't mean he'll show up the next game, but I think for Sunday, there's a very good chance he'll show up. Like I mentioned, guys like Daniel Jones have had success against Cleveland. So I'm feeling, let's call it cautiously optimistic about the Saints. I think this is a really good opportunity for them to get back-to-back wins. And I don't know, I just gut feeling right now, I believe they're going to do it. But I'm curious to know what you guys have to think, and we're going to get into our fan Q&A in just a second. Before I do that, I want to get a quick word from Theo's Pizza.
Scan the code now and tackle your hunger with Theo's Pizza, your neighborhood pizza with 5 convenient locations. Who dat? Your taste buds are about to find out.
Once again, thank you to Theo's Pizza for being part of the program. We greatly appreciate it. Let's get into our fan Q&A presented by Sunshine, your hometown John Deere. Nothing runs like a deer. We're going to start off with a super chat from Michael saying, how long will we be in purgatory? First off, Michael, thank you for the support. Second, I think it could be a while. I always say about the NFL, the key to getting out, and you guys know this, so it's not like I'm breaking any news here. The key to success in the NFL is drafting well. Saints got out of purgatory in 2017. Obviously, it helps that they have Drew Brees. No question about it. You cannot replicate a Drew Brees. But it helps when you draft as well as you do in 2017 when you got impact player after impact player after impact player. Just think about that draft. And I know that's a rarity. It's a rarity. I understand that. But you got your right tackle, your running back, your cornerback, and your safety. And obviously getting Trey Hendrickson and developing him later on was great. But 4 impact players. It doesn't mean every draft you're going to be able to get 4 impact players. But the Saints need to start having drafts similar to their 2022 draft and not their 2023 draft. Because 2022, it might not be the sexiest class in the world, but when Chris Olave is healthy, he's a really good player. When Alontae Taylor is getting close to the line of scrimmage, he's an impact player. Trevor Penning, for all the shit we've given him, is developing into a starter. And if he can hold his own at right tackle, and he's your right tackle of the future, Great. Those are 3 players you drafted. On top of that, Rashid Shaheed from that undrafted class, you know what he can do when he's healthy. So you feel like you took 4 impact players there. What you can't have is 2023 where Brian Brzee is an okay player right now that should be better, but unfortunately, he hasn't taken that next step. Isaiah Foskey hasn't taken any steps. Kendra Miller takes 1 step and gets hurt. So when you have those 3 picks in the beginning of your draft and you're not getting enough there from those, that's where we're going to be stuck in purgatory. I get your point, Michael, and I do understand why fans would be worried if the Saints go, let's say 6-11, they're stuck in the middle, right? And I totally understand that. The biggest problem for the Saints, though, is not where they're drafting, it's who they're drafting. And that's not going to change if the front office doesn't get tweaked at all. You know, regardless of where they're picking, they could be picking 2 or 3, and if you still have the same guys that are fucking up, it's not going to change anything. So I get your point, and I am worried about this team being stuck in neutral for a while, and I think it could be a while. But it all starts with that. The minute you start having accountability and they start making changes to their approach, I think that's going to be the start to getting out of purgatory. So I can't really put a timeline on it until that happens. But that's why, as I said before, I'm worried about who's making the picks, not where are they picking more than anything else. Bayou Boys 504 says it's possible we can go on a run and win the division. I won't go that far yet. What I will say is the way this is set up schedule-wise, Falcons' schedule for the next 3 games is going to get a little tough. Got the Broncos. You know Sean Payton loves going up against the Falcons. Got the Chargers. That's been a really, really respectable team this year. You got the Vikings. 3 games in a row. This isn't to say it's going to happen, but this is where if Darren Rizzi wants to prove he's different from Dennis Allen, and we know besides the energy thing, it's win the next 3 games. Because the one thing I'll remember most about the Dennis Allen era is every time you felt like this can be the moment for them, what'd they do? They dropped a game they shouldn't. So if the Saints want to go on a run here and make the last month of the season really fun, put yourself in a position where you win the next 3. Atlanta, in my opinion, is going to lose at least 1 to 2 of those 3 games. I might go, honestly, I might go 2, maybe 3. So if Atlanta, let's say, drops 2 and you're able to win the next 3, you have a conversation. But you got to take care of your business. And I think this is important for Darren Rizzi to be able to do that. Because I know for a fact Dennis Allen wouldn't. Because that's just what he's shown. Every time you feel like the run's happening, they do drop that game that they shouldn't drop. Michael says, go on a run for a top 10 pick. Yeah, I think that's probably the more likely scenario. Michael, I really do. I think there's a loss coming up to the Commanders at some point, loss coming up to the Packers. Bucs game will be tough because it's division. Rams game will be tough. Even Cleveland will be tough. Cleveland's got talented players. They're just not playing well. So it's never going to be easy. You know that. Michael says, because of the roster, they'll get a top 10 pick. I don't see them winning more than 2 to 3 more games, to be honest. Yeah, I think 3 is kind of the number I'm comfortable of saying right now, which would get them to 6 wins, 6-11. Would I be shocked if they squeak out 1 more? No. But not expecting Commanders and Packers wins with the way those teams have played. Denzel saying, tank, baby, tank. Bayou Boys 504 says, 1 pick's not going to save the franchise, though. Better off getting a good mix of later round players and vets. I do agree with that part. There isn't one guy that's going to save the franchise for this team. They have so many holes right now. Like, you can argue they are going to need a new linebacker when they lose DeMario. And DeMario's been on the decline finally because of age. It took forever, but it's finally coming. Defensive end, you need him. Defensive tackle, you need it. Offensive line, you still need help. Quarterback, biggest hole probably for the future. You're going to need a quarterback in the future. Wide receiver help, you still need wide receiver help. Tight end help, you need another tight end in the room, maybe 2. Running back, who's going to help out Alvin? So many needs on this team that one's not going to fix it. And all I'm going to say is, because I'm not a big believer in tanking, I do want the Saints to get one of those exciting prospects. Like I've said before, I think it'd be freaking awesome if we got to watch a Travis Hunter on the Saints, because those seem like special talents. But I don't want the Saints to become the Jacksonville Jaguars, where losing is just a part of them now. And I know people say, well, Chris, the Saints used to lose a lot. And I get that, guys. But their culture now, as bad as the last 3 years have been for us fans, is not where it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's just different. And I think for, let's say, like I mentioned, Jacksonville, no matter how many times they're picking first, they still manage to stink. No matter how many coaches they go through, no matter if they get their quarterback. Again, even this year, If the draft were to start tomorrow, I believe they're picking first. So sometimes you just can't shake that losing culture, no matter how hard you try. So that's why I'm not a big, believer in tanking. But if they start losing a bunch of games like they have earlier this season, where they lost 7 in a row, and 7 in a row puts you in a hell of a hole, and the Saints lose 3 more, yeah, maybe you're not bringing guys back from injury, and that is your form of tanking. But that's the only move I would say that would be pro losing, would be that. I just don't think it's good for the culture. Bayou Boys 504 says they move around too much money. It's going to come back and haunt us. I think it kind of is right now. And I think that's why they're in the situation they're in. I think that for the Saints, if the cap situation wasn't a mess, I actually think this would be a pretty attractive job. Their history over the last 20 years has been really good. There's patience there with management, good owner, but that cap situation's brutal. You got to go another 2 years of this, especially next year. Next year's going to be tough. You got another 2 years before you kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel, financially speaking, Flamey says, Mickey also never knows when to fire someone. I will say this has been a really bad look for Mickey the last couple of weeks, right? Defending Dennis Allen till the very end, still defending him in radio interviews. And when you get asked about Darren Rizzi, I don't know, you guys tell me if I'm overreacting, but earlier this week when he did his radio spot, he was asked about Darren Rizzi and the impact he had, and he said, and I quote, "When you have a midseason change, and this goes for any team, you're going to get a little bump in emotion, right? And I thought Rizzi did a great job of accentuating that, of having some tangible things that were different throughout the week and the preparation. I think he stated some things verbally that need to be stated and talked a lot about accountability and being all in and having a different mindset for the week." I think the last part was good. But again, I'm probably reading into it. A little bump in emotion. It was more than that. I just think he's a GM right now who doesn't want to admit that Dennis Allen move didn't work. And it's okay that it didn't work. The best part about the NFL is when you make a mistake, if you act quick enough, you can correct that mistake. And the Saints are trying to do that right now in real time with Dennis Allen. Just seems like one person's not letting it happen. Bayou Boys 504 says Alante and Kool-Aid will be great. I really hope so. I will say I thought Alante struggled mightily last week. Thought it was his worst game this season by far. Now, to be fair, he's been great this season, so it's kind of bound for a bad game. But that was a rough one, and I want to see how he responds. As for Kool-Aid, this is a tremendous opportunity for him here. With Marshawn no longer in the picture and Adebo hurt, Kool-Aid's got a chance to play well enough that we're not having a discussion about him next offseason. And I think that would be the best thing. If Kool-Aid can play well enough in spurts where you go into next summer and you're not even asking about what he's got as a role. And it goes back to what I said last year. I said last year, with that draft class, you are not getting enough from your guys. You're just not. And if the Saints are able to go into next offseason where Fuaga hit and Kool-Aid McKinstry hit, you're feeling a little bit better. It doesn't make everything perfect. It doesn't. We know that. But you're feeling a little bit better about that draft. So I really hope that Kool-Aid could come in and really give this team a shot in the arm defensively. Travis says, anyway, the Saints win out. Win out, I don't think so. I think there's at least a couple losses on this schedule for sure. Michael bringing up Breeze and Carr's first 10-year stats, and then says Carr is as good or better than Drew, but Raiders suck. I don't agree with that part. No knock on Carr. And I've always said Carr isn't a solid quarterback when things are comfortable, but that's about it. Bayou Boys 504 says Carr just needs to be comfortable when he is lights out. Drew can perform either way. That's a difference. Yep, that's a very good point. And that's kind of how I feel about it. If you tell me this Sunday, Saints are going to run the football and their O-line is going to protect, I am telling you Derek Carr is going to have a good game, and I'd be confident in that. Take it to the bank. But if those things aren't going in his way, then yeah, I'd be pretty worried. Rose City says Kubiak can't abandon the run and's got to adjust out of the half. I agree with you, but I want to throw this out there. Can Kubiak adjust? That's the question. He hasn't shown it yet, and I'm starting to wonder if that's just who he is, right? As a play caller, is he just incapable of making those adjustments that you need from those guys? So it's a great point, and I agree with you. But that's going to be my question. Can he adjust? I thought the offense in the second half against the Falcons really stalled till that final drive where Carr, throws what should have been a touchdown pass to Alvin and Alvin drops it. That second half offense was rough. So that's my biggest question. I think Kubiak's done a great job scripting drives. He's been outstanding. But you got to start being able to make those second half adjustments, and he just hasn't been able to do that. Bio Boys 504 says McCoy comes back. The run should be better. I agree. Also said Peyton Turner needs to play the same this week. Will help Cam, Chase, and Carl. Yeah, I thought that Peyton Turner looked really good. I thought that he looked really good on Sunday, which is a great sign. I think he's a player that can have those flashes of, solid football. And then he gets hurt. And thankfully, didn't get hurt last week, at least legitimately. I mean, he took a couple plays off to tend to an injury, but he was fine after that. I think for New Orleans, this is going to be really a telltale sign for this defensive line, right? You're going up against a really bad Browns offensive line. You got to get pressure. There's no excuse this weekend if you can't get pressure. And I think the Saints need a lot of defensive line help this offseason regardless. But if they can get pressure against the Browns, you got to start talking about, do we have any starting defensive linemen that we want to keep next year or long-term outside of Carl Granderson? Carl Granderson, you're committed to financially, and I think Carl's just got a great motor. But can Chase replicate what he did last week? I'd love if he did that. Can Peyton Turner replicate that? I'd love if he does that as well. So good showcase here for them to hopefully do that. Michael says, Bucs schedule's too easy. They'll win the division. Honestly, I don't know. If the Bucs were healthy, I would probably agree with you. But not having Mike Evans, not having Chris Godwin, obviously no Godwin for the rest of the year is just brutal. It's tough. Now, schedule-wise for the Buccaneers, it's not that bad. I mean, next 3 games, Giants, Panthers, Raiders, you should rattle those off. And then you got Cowboys and Panthers later on in the season. So you're not wrong about that, Michael. Their schedule is really shaping up to be an easy one. But those injuries really add up. And I do wonder at some point, those close losses, if they start to haunt you. Close loss against the Falcons, close loss against the Chiefs, close loss against the 49ers. And the last 2 games for them, Niners give up a game-winning field goal, Chiefs you give up a game-winning drive in overtime. I totally understand. Schedule is going to really open up for them in a major way, but that could weigh on the team, at least mentally. So I still think Atlanta wins the division. I just think they've built so much ground that they can afford a little bit of a stumble, and then if they regain their footing, they'll be okay. But, it's football. It is unpredictable, and we'll see what happens. So before we wrap up, guys, going to get into closing argument presented by Scott Fickner. As I mentioned at the top of the show, I think the next 3 games for the Saints are going to tell us all we need to know as to what direction they're going in. Is it full steam ahead for draft season, or is December going to be actually semi-meaningful for this team? Great opportunity Sunday against a bad Cleveland Browns team to win, get 2 wins in a row, going into the bye week, feel a little bit confident, let guys reset, recharge, get 2 weeks of prep for the Rams, which you would need. And who knows? Who knows from there? So I think this Sunday is going to be a good one. I do believe the Saints have what it takes to win. I do think they're going to win a very, very close game. And if not, we'll start talking about the draft. I guess that's where we'll kind of be heading. But that's going to wrap it up, guys, for this edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I want to thank you, as always, for listening. Make sure you tune in on Sunday because we're going to have our halftime show powered by 4D and also have our post-game live stream. So we want you guys there so you can share your thoughts and talk all about it here on the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation.